Yes,
Not
we
waiting for
are.
anybody else? Okay. All right, so we'll call to order the North Broward Hospital District Human Resources Committee meeting Wednesday, November 29th, 2017, a few minutes after 11. Do a roll call, I guess, or do you do a roll call? How about I do the roll call? I'll do the roll call. Commissioner Wellens.
Here.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Here.
And I am here, Commissioner Uri. First order of business is approval of minutes from the February 21st and May 19th, 2017 meetings. I'm not sure, Commissioner Wellens, if you were here in February or not, but I believe you were in May. I had an opportunity to review the minutes, and they appeared, to, at least to me, to accurately reflect our deliberations. So unless there's any objection, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
A second?
Second. Sorry.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. All right, unanimous. Excellent. We're off to a good start.
Count your blessings.
That's right. The second item on the agenda today is the salary for the interim chief internal auditor. This was, obviously something that we need to be, I think, a little bit better at addressing more swiftly, but at least we're catching this one relatively soon. I don't know, Mr. Nymar, if you want to just give us a little background on,
Absolutely.
some of the thoughts that I think you've shared, at least a little bit of them, with respect to some salary suggestions.
Absolutely. Just to kind of put this in the right framework, Commissioners, the previous individual that was in this role left on October 14th, 2016. At a commission meeting in September, we actually finally made Mr. Nigel Crooks the interim chief internal auditor at that time. So the discussion that we're going to have today really is regarding salary would make him would be retroactive to September 25th of 2017. So let me just kind of put that in place. So Mr. Nigel Crooks has been a part of Broward Health since November of 2014. I believe he's done a pretty stellar job for the moment, in very unusual circumstances at the district since that point. Really, in the absence of a leader, he just willingly stepped in and was the somewhat designated leader of the department since October of 2016 when his predecessor left. So in terms of his current pay, just so you're aware of where he sits, he's currently making $91,540. What was the number? 91,540, which is obviously almost half of where the market is saying that he should be in this role. Okay, at the 50th percentile, the fair market value for this role should pay $180,397. And that is my recommendation regarding his salary. This salary is at the 50th percentile, which has been the standard that we have used for the most part.
Right. No, just so that I'm aware, or at least this committee's aware, the years of experience, the qualifications, and so on for Mr. Crooks are consistent with the 50th percentile of folks in the same position?
I would say that is correct. That is correct. He is experienced, but he doesn't have a tremendous amount of years above the qualifications for the role. If that's
I'm not sure.
if that's what you're
I guess
asking.
what I'm not disputing the 50%. I just
Sure.
want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples, I
Okay.
guess. So so for the person in that 50th percentile at that 180 figure, that person would have X number of years of experience in
And that
this.
is, he would fit exactly
Right.
into
And
that.
as far as other designations, qualifications, what have you, education, he fits all of those same. So we're at least comparing apples to apples.
That is correct.
Okay. And he fits, as far as I'm aware, the requirements of this role within this organization, correct, in terms of experience, education, designations, and so on, right?
That is
like as far as what we have communicated to the public, right? That's,
Correct.
I just want to reiterate that. That was my understanding as well.
He's absolutely qualified for the role.
Okay, and Broward Health policy or practice has been somewhat consistent with this 50th percentile for similar situations that we've experienced, as I recall, because we've had a number of interim management positions and so on. So
That is absolutely
that's
right.
correct.
That has been consistent. I mean, we've made adjustments in other specific situations, but the circumstances, called for it. It depends on a lot of different factors. In this case, I believe the 50th percentile is appropriate.
Okay.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
Do we do regular reviews of interim positions? I mean, has he had have we done like a review of his performance? Or is that all up to date, consistent?
Yeah, that's a board
Yes.
responsibility. Because the internal auditor reports to the board. So to my knowledge, we haven't
Cool.
reviewed him, but go ahead.
Let me add a little bit of history here. We did have a formula that we worked weeks, if not months, and that all our direct reports would be reviewed, I think like every 6 months, okay?
Okay.
With everything and all the changes and all the motion and things that happen here, we haven't gone back to what we really should be doing. In this case, the internal auditor is a direct report to the board. So we have actually 4 direct reports.
No, I understand, but we haven't.
Oh,
we
we
haven't.
haven't.
We haven't met.
Right.
We haven't met to review him, at least since I've been on the board. I didn't know if it happened before I was on the board.
Well, because I don't think that he was acting, he didn't
He
become.
wasn't under the
He wasn't
jurisdiction of-
formally,
correct.
So that's where I was getting at. So in his previous role, he had been reviewed, all positive.
That is correct.
That's all I'm at. Okay,
Correct,
so,
correct.
Okay, because that's consistent with us promoting from within,
Mhm.
which makes sense because the people are loyal and good employees and have performed well in their jobs. I like the idea of taking somebody from within where it merits it. So that's where I'm getting at. So we have some history of him as an employee for a long period of time. The reviews were good, so he's stepping up in a role, and we're adjusting his salary commensurate with the responsibilities that he has today.
That is absolutely
Okay,
consistent.
that's what I want. I just want to make sure that we have some history of his performance, so we can back up the documentation to say this is why this person deserves it and warrants being paid and staying in that role.
I think where this gets a tad unique, at least to what we've done here, is his formal, I guess, installation as interim chief internal auditor. It was just relatively recently done within the last couple of months, but he had, according to all accounts, assumed those responsibilities somewhat synonymous with when the prior chief internal auditor had resigned. So the recommendation from Mr. Naimura is to not just bump his salary to the 50th percentile for someone in this position, but it's also to make that retroactive to when he had assumed those duties, even though he hadn't been formally appointed by this board to act in the interim capacity.
Right, so that was my next question. Are we retroactively making this back to what date?
Now,
approximately.
Obviously, that is the board decision. The approximate date would be October 15th, 2016.
Okay, so approximately a little over a year. Yes. And he was formally, okay. And that's consistent with Broward Health's policies of what we've done in the past and in these situations? I know it doesn't happen often, or is it consistent with what we have as a policy, as a practice?
I don't know about the consistency part, but I believe it's the right thing to do in this particular situation. Because I think Commissioner Yuri mentioned, the situation's a little unique because he was somewhat in the role, but only really formally appointed recently. So I can't imagine that happens often.
Okay, so we're talking about somewhere between $90,000 to $100,000 retroactive. Okay, fine.
Yeah, let me clarify my statement. What I meant to, where I was going to, it was the fact that we have not really had the opportunity because he was not part of he was not named as interim until that. But for future reference, and you can go back to your records and find out when we had that policy created like a couple of years ago. Okay. So, but that's for another discussion.
Perfect.
He never. I know that for what I hear from his peers, is that he really took up on a leadership role from the very beginning without even being asked for. Because I know that we have that position open for quite a while, and I think that we're doing the right thing this time, because with Mr. Alfield, I think he was going like for a year before he was compensated, and he was another fellow that was very humble. He never really asked for, where's my money, so if that's what you're recommending, and we're following all the rules and regulations and procedures, and I'm sorry I can't apply for the job, because I think that that's the right thing to do.
Do we need a motion to take to the board? Okay, so you want to make the motion, Rocky?
Yeah, well, I'll make the motion that, correct me if I'm wrong, okay, that we paid the amount of, what you say?
$180,397.
Okay, according to the standards of Broward Health, and that also he would be compensated retroactively since October
15th,
okay,
October 15th, 2016.
Yeah. Now, do the interns make less money than the permanent ones?
That has not been what I found. I believe our practice from what the board has, more recently done while I've been at Broward Health is look at the market for the opportunity and try and compensate individuals that are in the interim at that rate.
Well, I know that when we did Ms. Capasso, it was between between two former. The range was between Dr. Sanadi and Ms. Grant at the time. It was somewhere in between it. But that's what you say. You guys are paying. I'm okay with it. So.
You want me to? You want me to clean up the resolution?
Yeah.
The motion. I make a motion that we establish the salary for the interim chief internal auditor at $108,397, consistent with the 50% fair market valuation for the responsibilities, and that we retroactively compensate the interim chief auditor back to the date at which he assumed the role, which is October 15, 2016, retroactive, and that the salary will be in place going forward.
And that you're recommending it to the board.
And that we're recommending it to the board for its formal approval.
Need a second?
Yeah. Second.
So, well, he made a motion, maybe I second. Basically, in the motion, I second. So now call the roll.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sorry about that, Chairman. I was just trying to clear up the language.
No, that's okay.
Make it simple and clean. Does that cover everything we need on there? I assume it does.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Next, we have some interviews today in terms of a selection process for Chief Internal Auditor. We've had a process in the brief 2 years I've been on this board. But in terms of a selection process, I don't necessarily see a reason to do something different than what we've done. But maybe, Mr. Neymour, you can kind of give us some of your thoughts on maybe since you've come from another organization, if there's some best practices that we either haven't followed or you would recommend that we follow. I'd love to have your input on that.
Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Uri. So just to step back a little moment, and in the minutes for February 21st of 2017, part of your packages, there was Commissioner Rodriguez's motion that HR committee advance candidates 1, 2, 6, and 7, and their name there, to the board for consideration, with the understanding that other candidates are also open for consideration. So I think part of the first issue that we have to resolve today is who's still in consideration, if that's the group that we want to continue with, and if so, then what would that process be moving forward? So my team followed up with the candidates to determine who was still available. And of the full list, I'll read out those names just so the board has them. Joseph Kuruk, K-U-R-U-C, is still available. James Mears withdrew. Christine Hogan Newgren withdrew, and Joshua Aubrey is still available.
So how many do you have?
Of those 4, 2 are still available. I guess the only thing I would ask the board to possibly consider is the internal candidate who's Nigel Crooks that we just talked about, especially since he's the one who has been doing the job essentially since October of 2016. He was an applicant, so that's not the issue. And I believe he's worthy of the consideration. So, but
It better be worthy. We just recommend it to the
that is
board.
absolutely right.
Okay.
So as a result, if you take the ones that you were interested in and you throw him in, and you consider the ones that withdrew, we would have a total of 3 candidates that you would probably consider interviewing.
Okay.
So, all right.
And so you, just so I'm clear, you have, for each of these folks, outside of Mr. Crooks, you have been in touch with them, and
That is correct.
there is still an interest, and we would be looking to schedule some type of interview.
Absolutely. There's others, just to be clear, that are still interested, but were not selected by the board the last time. But they maintain their interest, and those names I have as well.
Oh, okay. And those are in this packet, correct?
Yes.
This would be O'Keefe and Kulamani, maybe? Is that?
That is correct.
Okay. I mean, maybe I guess I'm a more the merrier person. I guess it's easy to say when there's only 5 people, but I would have no trouble recommending to the board that we, at least try to interview all 5. I would just try to, as best as possible, to organize that at one time. So I think it's a little bit easier, not just that it's all about what's easy, but I think it's also easier to differentiate between people when you're doing somewhat of a, one after the next, which I think would be helpful for our colleagues. But that may or may not be possible, so.
Let me ask you, you said 5, I'm a little confused now. How do you come up with 5? There's 2 left?
So you
And
recommended 4.
Right.
Originally there were 8 total candidates.
Right.
In your motion from February, you recommended 4.
Right.
2 of them said no, they withdrew. So you have 2 of those. And then my recommendation was to include the current interim individual. So that would make 3. And then there are others that still maintain interest and haven't withdrawn, but were not considered when the board made the last shortlist.
And you're saying...
And those are the additional 2. That makes
So
5.
you say let's interview all 5?
Right.
I think that's the right thing to do. I don't know. What do you think?
Do we have a policy of how long somebody can be intern? Because I asked this question for another reason. My preference, given that we've got somebody in the role who's done everything we've asked him to do without asking him. He stepped up. He assumed the responsibility. We've got other positions we're trying to fill. We've got a lot of things in the plate. I'm saying maybe we're making a commitment to this, and maybe we table this discussion for a couple of months until we finish our searches for Chief Compliance Officer, CEO, and come back and look at Internal Auditor down the road. We have somebody in the role who's doing a really good job, and I think maybe we owe him an opportunity to prove himself. I think we may have the candidate already in place. I don't know what the policy is.
Right.
Because I haven't read it.
I think the challenge, at least as I see it, is especially for a direct board report, direct board hire, I think it's to say the least incumbent on the board to fill those positions. I guess whatever the policy is, if there even is one, which there may or may not be, in terms of how long somebody can serve in an interim, I think it's, I think it's just a responsibility of this board to do it. And all of the things that you mentioned would certainly be appropriate considerations for, making an interim person a permanent person, okay? But I think all of that would be done in, concert with some comparison to other folks in that role. In the reality, I think, is considering, between now and the end of the year, I think it's probably unlikely that we'll get 5 folks to be able to somewhat align their schedules. My gut is that we're probably looking sometime in January anyway. So I suppose we're in some ways probably doing both things. One is, giving, Mr. Crooks another couple of months to demonstrate his mettle, but also advancing, our responsibilities in terms of filling these positions with permanent folks.
I'm okay with that, but maybe I come back to this, say that we went through a process to come to the candidates that we had. Maybe we bring the 3 candidates out of the 5 that were advanced originally by the selection process that we had, not add 2 people that weren't part of it, that didn't make the cut the first time. Let's bring those 3 candidates in and see what we have. We have Nigel Cook plus the 2 that the board has already recommended as the final 5 that we were going to interview. 2 have left. I suspect that if you go another couple of months, which is probably what's going to happen by the time we get our schedules set, interviews set, notices made, you're talking January, February. Let's see where we are. But I mean, to bring 2 people that weren't part of the mix, that I think the board had reviewed their applications.
Well, they were part of the mix. They just we had made a decision that we weren't going to interview 8 people, so
we narrowed it down to 5. So now it's down to 3.
Right. So, I'm
okay with it.
To me, I don't have a problem either way. I suppose I just kind of feel like it may be that much more insightful to have, a few different perspectives outside of 3. But
I'm fine with it. If you want to bring on 5, I don't really have a. It doesn't matter.
Are they local? I don't remember. I think one of them is, at a minimum, one of them I think is out of town. But not that matters. But I just was curious. I didn't know.
No, they're not.
They're all local?
No, are we talking about the 2 additional or all 5?
Well, no, the 2 additional.
The 2 additional are not local.
Okay, so
All right. I'd like to, we got to thread lightly on this, because one thing is, what we're doing is going to have a reflection outside. I'd like to bring the general counsel here and ask a question. We had selected a number of people, and these people have been patient enough to wait for an interview for months. How do we play Solomon, and how do we, how is it gonna, what's the optics gonna be in order for us to be fair and balanced on the approach? If we bring in 2 new candidates that the board did not choose to begin with, would that be fair for the 2 people that applied earlier?
legally.
Legally, I'm
I'm not
just,
aware of any legal stance one way or the other.
well, I'm asking for your opinion because I just want to make sure that if we do something, that we're doing it right. You know what I'm saying?
Right, so there's no legal prohibition or mandate to do either way. It's your discretion on whether you want to take the two candidates who didn't make the first cut and include them or not. It's a question that you have to balance the inclusiveness versus the time factor of getting the candidates to come in and your all respective schedules for the board.
Maybe what we do, okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Maybe what we do is we decide when the interview date is, okay? Or maybe we have 2 dates. I don't, whatever, I'm not. And if 5 people can figure out how to get here and do it, then we meet 5 people. If one, for one reason or another, can't be here at that time, then, I don't want to be, cold about it, but, maybe that's, the way to be inclusive, but then if they end up, eliminating themselves, then they eliminate themselves. Does that make sense? Because we're giving them quite a bit of advance notice. I mean, we planned something, in January. I don't think that between now, even I can figure out a way to make something happen if I really want to make it happen, 2 months from now.
Just to move back just very slightly, Commissioner Yuri, the motion as it read previously, however, did say with understanding that other candidates are also open for consideration. So you did have that as part of your motion when you reduced the number to the 4.
Well, that's a good standing. Now the question is, those people from out of town, we have to pay for them to come down here, right?
That is correct, yes, Commissioner.
I know the next meeting in January is the day of the board meeting.
Yeah, but then we also have something else too, that
Right.
you and I need to make sure that we can find 5 commissioners to do the CEO
Well,
meeting.
no, what I'm saying is if we're going to bring 5 people in, which I'm okay with, I don't have a problem with it because the motion, I just read it again and it does say that. So I say we try to do it prior to a board meeting so that we know that the majority of the commissioners will be here, because trying to get 5 of us to coordinate our schedules is a challenging thing, because the process to do that is difficult because of the response,
Because you can't call in and you can't.
Correct. So I would suggest if we're going to do this, and we want to do this in a judicious fashion, let's do it either in the January board meeting or the February board meeting prior to it. Let's do the interviews of the chief internal auditor candidates, because we know that we're going to have at least 4 of us here for those dates. Lock those dates down ahead of time. Let Peter reach out to the candidates, give them the dates. He'll coordinate the times later. So this is the date of the interviews, and they'll have more than adequate time to clear their schedules and make sure that they're available on the date that works. And at least that's a date that the majority of us will be here. Because I think if we try to pick another date, it's always,
No, I don't.
Well, here's a problem we have. And this is mind-boggling. We cannot run this board unless we have 2 days a month, one to do committee work and one to do board work. In all other boards, some people may hope that the administration takes over and you go to the board meeting and you rubber stamp everything. This is a working board with $2 billion, and we need to figure out the way to have 2 days a month that we're not doing anything else, because every time that, for instance, the three of us here, we work on commission. And if we don't sell, we don't make any money, right? And the problem is that if I gotta wait 3 or 4 days for somebody to answer whether they can be here or not, that totally blocks my whole week. I can't do anything. So, and it's happening all over and over again. So, but that's another story. We gotta get back to that. We also, the most important thing that we need to do, okay, is make sure that we have 2 days back to back in January to deal with the CEO search. Because you and I made a commitment that we would have these guys ready, and we have. They're ready, and we wanted to get an interview by, actually we're hoping to have a contract for the CEO ready by December or January. Now, we did through all the process, ba-bam, 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 300 and some odd people applied, we got 6 good candidates. And now, we have to interview these folks, we have to interview some people with compliance, and I think the priority has to be, you know, I mean, I like to deliver what we promised, is to interview these people at the very beginning of January, because it's impossible to try to get them here by next week during Christmas and all the Jewish holidays and everything else. So I just want to bring that up, because to me, I take priority in doing the CEO search before we interview the chief internal auditor, because the reality is we have somebody as an interim.
No, I know, but I think what Commissioner Wallace is saying, this is not a committee decision or even a committee recommendation. This is a board decision. So since we have a board meeting scheduled in January and we have an interim, I think to Commissioner Wallace's point, of course it's imperative that we fill the role with a permanent person, but urgent is not the nature of this situation. So since we already have a date on the calendar when everyone on the board, or at least 4 out of 5, have committed to being available, it would make sense that they would be in town, and given this much notice, be able to hopefully set aside an additional couple of hours that day to have these interviews scheduled. So the hope was that we could today say, these are the candidates that we're going to interview. This is when we're going to interview them, at least as far as a recommendation from this committee. And then we have a board meeting later this afternoon where we, as a board, agree or disagree. And let's assume for just a moment that we agree, and that gives Mr. Naimura ample time to coordinate those folks' schedules. That's all. And so outside of all of that, yes, we've got to find 2 days or however many. You know, when we did the last CEO interviews, we didn't just communicate when round 1 was going to be, we communicated when round 2 was going to be, because we know folks that are going to fill that type of a role do have other responsibilities that can make their schedule somewhat challenging. So we wanted people to not just make the commitment to the first round of interviews, but know when the second round was in advance as well. So I think your point's well taken. We've tried for the last 2 years to have a committee day and then a board day and so on, and I think that's wonderful, and I'd love to get back to that too, because it makes my schedule that much easier to predict. We've just had a lot of moving parts here that make it a little cumbersome to do it when we only have 5 people to get 4.
That's what I was saying about tabling the interviews, but I'm fine to schedule them if it's January or it's February.
Well, remember, we're only recommending to our colleagues.
No, but we have to recommend. So I'm saying our committee can make a recommendation that we want to do it on this day in January, February. Because I agree with the chairman that the most important thing that we do is lock down the dates for the CEO search, make sure those candidates are available to get here, not only logistically, but also make sure that the follow-up part of that process can work, and that's the meetings that are going to follow the interviews at the hospitals. So I think that's the critical time-consuming effort that we need right now. If we didn't have a person in that role, I'd say maybe it's different, but we have somebody filling that role, is doing a bang-up job, been in the role for over a year, we're comfortable with the quality and of the work that he's doing. So pushing that out a month or two, I don't think is going to make a big deal. As long as we can communicate that we have a lockdown date and we can communicate to those candidates, this is the date of the interviews, and they can make a decision whether they want to, you know, wait the month or not. And that's always up to the candidate to make that decision. But I think in the short term, in the next 30 days, the most important thing is to make sure that we can get together to do the CEO portion of it, which is taking longer than it should, but it's the nature of the way this board has to operate, so it makes it difficult. So that was all of my recommendation.
Well, I don't disagree.
I'm not saying push it out 6 months. I'm saying just push it out until we get the CEO interviews done. And I don't care if we do it on the day of the board meeting in January or the February board meeting. Let's just recommend a date and see if the board approves it and move on.
Right now, we can have a committee meeting because there's 3 of us on that audit committee, and you have a chief. So that is a working part. That I agree with everything you said. And by the way, I'll have a little job for you later on. Just what I tell you.
Okay, no problem.
Because you kind of.
I'm glad to hear you don't have one for me because I got enough. Look, I'm not partial to the January board meeting. If you want to do the February board, all I would say is I'm partial to, recognizing that the time is not for this board to be filling at a minimum, filling the positions that the board fills. I don't think we have acceptable excuses for not filling those positions.
Right.
And so, to me, it would be appropriate to recommend to our colleagues later this afternoon that we schedule these interviews for the Chief Internal Auditor position to be on board day, which would be January, whatever day that is, and we'll be able to commit to these candidates. Here's the day, and the decision will be, I would at least expect that we would be able to communicate a decision sometime between that day and the next board meeting. Whether we meet in between or not, as a board, we would have to vote. Or we may be prepared to vote that January, whatever day that board meeting is, or we may choose to vote at the February board meeting or sometime in between. I can't, obviously I don't know. But I think we have to be able to communicate to candidates when's the date of the interview and when they would expect to be able to have a decision from this board, because their names become public. Obviously, they're already, I guess, public, but I guess there's probably not as much brouhaha over internal auditor versus CEO, but I think it's important to those folks that they know what timeline they're looking at, and I say that because some of them expressed an interest, well, it'll almost be a year ago by the time we actually interview them. So I think that we need to lay that timeline out in advance. I think that's only fair. Did you share that view?
I do. Whatever the timeline is, even if you say board meeting February, I think just the knowledge that on this particular day that would be for that purpose is helpful. So if it's January, it's January. If it's February, but at least then myself and my team can contact the candidate and say, on this particular day, you'll be interviewed, and we'll finally be moving this process forward. So, if the committee members wanted to look at their calendars and decide board day, we'll commit to it. Just keep in mind, you have 5 individuals that we are deciding to move forward. So 5 individuals on a board day would be at least 5-6 hours of interviews if you give them an hour. So just that's something you.
Well, how much time I don't remember how much time we gave the CEO candidates last time, or if there's, I think this role is a little different. I don't know for at least me personally that I would need an hour, but that doesn't mean that it's not. Let's do this. We're only making a recommendation. So while, now there's 4 of us out of 5 here, I think it's fine to make a recommendation, and I'll be happy to debate and hash out and modify as needed later this evening. You know,
just you want me to make a motion for the So I make a motion. Okay.
Just a quick question, Commissioner Wellens. Is it the full board that has to interview the candidates,
yes.
or just this?
Yeah, it's a full board because it's a full board
Is
decision.
it the right report?
Well, let's say this.
It's a quorum of the full board. At least.
Yeah, it's four. At a minimum, it's four because it is effectively a board meeting that is to interview chief internal auditor candidates. So,
Okay, great.
So, yes.
So I'll make a motion that we recommend to the full board that we schedule for the January board meeting or the February board meeting the interviews of all 5 candidates that have expressed an interest in the chief internal auditor position. The interviews will last no more than 45 minutes each. And 1 week following the interviews, we'll reconvene and make a determination if any of those candidates are going that we want to recommend for a permanent position, subject to the board. What's that?
Availability?
Yeah, board availability and time constraints.
I know I just got here, but may I ask one question?
Of course.
It's a 2-year term, right?
No, this is
No,
for the
this is a
chief internal auditor.
Chief internal auditor.
Oh, okay, I thought you were talking about the audit. Oh, never mind, I thought you were talking about the audit vacancy.
All right.
Never mind.
Okay, so
What happens when you come in late?
I guess I'll ask the general counsel,
Would you
did
accept
get-
the amendment possibly?
Of course.
Well,
I wanted to
you
read
haven't
back-
heard the amendment yet.
I wanted to read back the, you know what I'm saying? I'm happy. I wanted to read back what the motion is, so if it needs to be amended, we know exactly what you had. Did you write it? You didn't write it.
I wrote some of it. It was to recommend to the full board that in the January or February board meeting, the board interview all 5 of the candidates for a time of 45 minutes each. And then approximately 1 week following the interviews, the board will reconvene to make a determination subject to board availability and time constraints.
That's exactly what I wanted. Okay.
The only amendment I was going to suggest is that we, as opposed to putting the 1 week in there, that the board that we would be communicating to the candidates not just when the interview date will be, but that the decision would be made between that, either that date or the next board meeting or any time in between, that we would actually convene to do such a thing. I guess the point being, it may be abundantly obvious to to us that there's a candidate. It may not be. We may decide on that at that board meeting that there's a reason to, that let's just say 45 minutes wasn't enough, but we want to have 2 people, come back. I don't know, but I hate to, commit people to a week after the interviews to make a decision when I don't really know necessarily what people's schedules are. So since we have a January board meeting, we have a February board meeting, if we were, I think at a minimum, we can commit to making some decision either of those days as opposed to in between. That was the only suggestion I was going to
All right, so
we can always meet in between. We can always decide to do that.
So if I amend my motion to say that we schedule the interviews for the January or February board meeting, depending upon the board's availability, and then we will make a decision on the candidate or candidates that we by the following board meeting of the interviews.
Right. On or before the
On or before the following board meeting. So if the board meeting happens in January, we would have had to make a decision by February. If it's February, we have to make a decision by March. What I don't want to do is leave this open-ended where it can drag on for 3 or 4 months.
No, I agree. That was my point too.
I mean, these candidates have been in the wind for a long time, but we've had somebody in the role who's been doing the job, so it hasn't been an urgency issue. But I think if we're going to bring them in, I think we owe them, and that's why I wanted to try to tighten that up to shorter time. But I'm happy to say by on or before the following board meeting.
Yep.
Does that leave us enough room to get this done?
Sure.
Okay.
Lynn, can you just read it again? Sorry.
The motion is to recommend to the full board to schedule interviews at the next January or February board meeting. Interviews to be of all 5 candidates at 45 minutes apiece. Then between that board meeting and the next subsequent board meeting, a decision will be made as to candidate or candidates, subject to board availability and time constraints.
So it would be on or before the next regularly scheduled board meeting.
And I think that's a fair message.
I think
we
that's
can communicate if the board approves, that's something we can communicate to the candidates so they know the schedule, they know exactly what to expect, when they would know a decision. And I would suggest that if the sooner we can make a decision and let the candidates know, the better for them, because they go on with their lives. Either they're going to come on board or they're going to go on and do what they're doing, and that's fine. Because I always want to respect the candidates' willingness to put their name out there and spend the time and to try to come on board. So either we're going to hire them or not. I think we owe them to let them know quickly.
Yep. Yeah. So Commissioner Robinson, just since you missed maybe a little bit of this debate, we have Chief Internal Auditor candidates that we had met and discussed and agreed to advance to interviews, which was in February, as I believe, of this year. So it's quite some time ago. Of the 4 people that we had advanced, 2 are still interested in the position. There were 2 others that had not been advanced out of that group that have continued to express an interest. And in addition to that, those 2 folks, the current interim internal auditor has also expressed interest in being considered for the permanent role, which would be a total of 5 folks. The committee meeting today suggested that we would invite all 5 of those people, the 2 of the 4 originally advanced, the 2 that remain interested, that even though they weren't originally advanced, and the current interim person to be interviewed, but we were going to just state specifically when the interview date was going to be, which is why we're doing it at the January or February board meeting, okay? So that gives folks plenty of time to arrange their schedules to be here, and if for some reason they can't be here, then their consideration would, I guess, essentially they would not be considered then for the position. And when we communicate the interview date, we wanted to also communicate a timeline under which they could expect a decision, especially considering that they had, for 4 of these folks at least, they had originally put their name in the hat nearly a year ago. So we just felt it would be appropriate to give them some timeline for when they could consider it. So that's the history of this.
I think that same procedure should be applied to the CEO candidate.
That's not a subject matter of this committee. But your point is well taken.
Well, we did. We added 1 more.
So we have a motion on the table. So do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. I guess can somebody mention to Mr. Mullins? Do you mind just mentioning to him that we're going to vote on his motion? Sure. I think I know what his vote is, but I don't want to presume. Sorry about that. Nope. All right. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Great. Thank you. So that's going to be as a recommendation to the board this afternoon. The last thing on the agenda is something I had spoken briefly with Mr. Nymore about, is just centering around engaging employees, team building. I guess at a many aspects of this are operational, so it's obviously not the role of this committee or board, but I do think that the role of this committee and board is to to advance the concept and advance the culture of teamwork and how we deal with enhancing morale, and so on. The feedback I personally have received is quite positive, but I think that I'll be anxious for you to share your thoughts, at least with this committee, on, what types of things as an organization we're doing or could be doing to, advance that culture, advance those concepts of team and so on. So anyway, that was just something I wanted to talk at least briefly about.
Absolutely. Taking our cues really from the board, it's in order to have a workforce that is productive and engaged, they need to feel that they're valued in a lot of different ways. As everyone knows, we've gone through a lot as an organization, and stability is key to employees feeling secure, and glad to be in their roles. As the Executive Vice President of HR, I've actually taken it very personal to ensure that our environment is exactly what we say that it should be, and that means that leaders that do not know how to lead are going to be helped or asked to depart, because it's essential to how productive we are. Our employees really need to know that we care. I know there's been a lot of change, and I think that has resulted in some employees just feeling, understandably unsure of their futures. But I think the change has been good. I think visibility from our leadership staff and our interim CEO, Bev Capasso, has been essential to them feeling that the tide is changing, and that as an organization, leaders all the way down, we're going to work as a team. It's very important to me that we're not a hierarchical type of organization, and that we're pretty much flat. Everyone's equal. No one's more important. We have rules that everybody follows. It doesn't matter what the level is. I think all those types of things, including just being very transparent, are essential really to creating the environment that we want to create. So employee engagement is critical, and for the most part, employees really associate how they feel about their role with their direct supervisor. So as we have been really, we have so many new leaders, and we really, one of the first things, for instance, at Medical Center, they have a retreat that they're going to be doing this Friday. And it's really, that's the type of thing that we will be doing this coming year for our leadership staff. There are a lot of new people coming in almost every week. So it's a renewal, and I'm excited about that in the future. But it's really about getting together as a team and kind of coming up with our agenda for the organization to move forward.
All right. Well, I guess just for purposes of everyone understanding, one of the things I had spoken with Mr. Nymore about, few industries and few people have as direct personal contact, but also very personal contact as do healthcare professionals. I know Commissioner Wellens and I are in a similar line of business, and while we're not healthcare folks, when you deal with people's financial affairs and all the intricacies of personal, business, family, and so on, it is also very, very personal. At least what I have found for people that work for me and also for myself is happy employees bring happiness to their job and to whom they're working with and for. And some years ago I had gotten friendly with the founder of Zappos, and I had mentioned to Mr. Nymore that they had a problem in their organization of dealing with customer service, right? And one of the things that they found was that people just weren't real happy doing what they were doing. And so because they weren't real happy doing what they were doing, it led to them having challenges in dealing with unhappy customers. So rather than just address how we deal with unhappy customers, they dealt with how do we put a culture in place that our employees are happy. And so that was the purpose of the conversation. And not to belabor the delivering happiness concept, but this was just something that he and I talked about, and whether it's the right framework for here or not is way outside my pay grade, but it's the concept.
Absolutely, and it is, right? Especially in healthcare, we're delivering compassionate care to individuals that are in distress. They're not here because they want to come and see our general counsel, so they come to Broward Health to receive needed medical assistance, obviously. The last thing we want is our employees not to be in the right frame of mind to provide that type of compassionate, caring, empathetic, demeanor and actions towards our patients. And that's why it's so critical that we have to treat our employees with respect and treat them well. And do the things that we can expect them to. We have to model the behavior with the people that work for the organization so they can do that in turn to our patients. And that's really my general philosophy. And taking actually a pretty tough stance with it, for us. And really it's a zero tolerance for bullies and people that do not care about the people who are working with them. It's really about a team approach, and that's the way we're going to really improve our service to the community.
Yeah, and I don't want any of this conversation to even remotely imply or suggest that we aren't doing these things and we're not delivering compassionate care or anything like that. It's just, I think we can all agree that we can all be better, and that's the point, is how we further that culture. So anyway, there's really not necessarily something that this committee or this board needs to act on, or motions or do. Is really more just to understand that we are doing those things, and to the extent that there's something that this board or committee can do, my hope, of course, is that you'll have no issue bringing that up either with us as a group or me, individually. I'm happy to listen, because those things are important to me. I had very similar conversations with Ms. Wong when she was in your position, so my stripes haven't changed on that. So.
Excellent. I'm excited to know that the board is very supportive of that. type of way of dealing with, with service and really a general respect for individuals both in the community and that work for us as well. I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I thought I'm probably on the streets more than anybody else here. And I often hear, despite a lot of your trials and tribulations, your service continues to be excellent, and media very seldom talk about those things, but because there's no drama to it, but the drama is with the patients. So I'm positive that while we can always improve the quality of health, the Broward health has not deteriorated to the point of no return. Because based on the things that I hear from community leaders who've had their mothers or their kids or their husbands, or their wife at the hospital. And so it's a blessing in disguise. So I take everything with a grain of salt.
Okay. All right, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Great. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.